Hello, this is Connor Stoops, and today's HTUC video is on Celesting, the roamer for the Winter 2022 event for Lumion Legacy. Celesting is pretty interesting and is pretty unique from what it can actually do, so let's talk about it. From the counters and checks and teammates, to the roles and sets Celesting can use, as well as its weaknesses and resistances, this video will teach you how to use and counter Celesting. The role that Celesting plays is a very easy question to answer and one that's very important, and its base stats can help us answer that. Its base stats are simple because its melee attack is the only stat you should never use, and its melee defense and range defense is both pretty mid, both being into the 70 range, but it is a bit bulkier than some of the offensive Lumions we are using today. And in its 91 speed is pretty decent, but it is in a bit of an awkward spot because it does get outsped by many of the Lumions in its speed tier, and something that you wouldn't really want to have in your speed tier to be outsped by. It does have good HP, which makes those defenses actually pretty good, and its 125 energy does let it make a lot of moves in a few turns. Specifically, it can do a Gamma Pulse in 6 turns, or 6 turns for Gamma Pulse, which is really good, and its 103 range attack is decent when it's compared to its other stats, but not really the best when you compare to Wall Breakers or Arc Cleaners. Its role for Celesting is, like I said, pretty simple because it's decently fast and bulky. Because of its speed and its defenses with its HP, Celesting can play a pretty fast pivot role and be able to outspeed many wall breakers, potentially wall them and hit them back first, and providing offensive pressure with pivots. It is most likely to play a defensive role, which is what I'm going to be teaching you how to do. It wouldn't be the best in offensive because it doesn't have the best setup, and there are of course better light and middle types that are better at the offensive job. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the weaknesses and resistances. The typing of light metal is very familiar if you did not know. It does have 4 weaknesses to Dark, Electric, Earth, and Brawler. Dark types like Vesperatu and only Vesperatu is pretty much the only Dark type you should be worried about other than Eclipse. Electric types like Holvantic, Phagenaut, Zulong, Metatoad are good electric types to be watching out for. Earth types like the new Gargolems, Tyrex, Cenomars, and Boneki is good stuff to watch out for. And Brawler types, mainly only Kanibo, and only Kanibo is the only Brawler types you should be worrying about. You also do have 6 resistances to Bug, Typeless, Air, Mind, Light, and Ice, which is pretty decent because Typeless is not really the best to resist to because only Tao Shinu can do that. Bug types like Garbantis and Harvesect is good to switch in on. Air types like Zeppelin, Stratosaurs, Wintrixes is also good to switch in on. Mind types specifically, stuff like Shachi, Metatoad, the Cosmores, Ferroglyph is good to switch in on as well. Light types like other Celestings, Valkyries, Namaris, Luminamis, and finally Ice types like the Wintrix, Himber, Barbadger, and some new ice types like Tangerine and Mocho is good stuff to be switching in on. You do have 1 immunity to Spirit, which is pretty nice because this even reinforces your Harvesect matchup, and it does let you switch in on Revenant as well. And you do have 1 major resistance to Ancient, so Ancient types like Obsidian is very good to switch in on. So with that out of the way, let's talk about its sets, which is pretty important. So the defensive pivot set is what I'm going to be recommending, mainly because it does take Celesting's best attributes and put them to use. The ability will be Reverberate or Mystic Tone. Reverberate is probably the more consistent and easier ability to use, while Mystic Tone can be niche, but it is not really the best as of right now. It does have a good personality of Nimble, which is what you should be running. You could of course run some other stuff like Smart, Robust, Clever, but Nimble is the most consistent because it allows you to do more sets down the road, which is pretty good. Frail can be your personality for decreasing, but Pure Nimble is what I recommend. The Health Amulet will be your main item choice, mainly because this is a defensive set, so running Recovery is important. You can also try to run a Milkshake if you want to run another Lumion with Health Amulet, but personally, just run Health Amulet on Celesting. You do have a good moveset of Metal Blast, Flash and Flee, and Gamma Pulse being your main 3 moves because they hit hard and Flash and Flee does great utility. And of course, we do have the Barbs, move. You can of course run other stuff like icicle traps, but in this metagame, barbs is pretty more important as of right now. And the TP is 200 HP, lets you have max HP. 8 energy will let you use 2 metal blasts, 2 barbs, and the rest can be gamma pulses or flash and fleas. 40 rage defense paired with the HP lets you live a 2-hit KO from a Gargolem holding an Essence or Power Cuffs, which is pretty good. 192 speed is to outspeed 200 Shachis, I'm pretty sure, so you can do that as well. 200 nimble Shachis, I'm pretty sure. And 56 range attack is just leftovers. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the counters and checks and the teammates of Celesting. Defensive counters and checks is very simple for Celesting. You just want to run stuff that can resist its coverage, and there is a lot. Defensive Pyrolins is pretty niche, but it is pretty good as of this metagame. But you can also run the classics like Chartiki, Malmerk, Stratosaur, and Iliguana, who originally walled the offensive variant of this thing, aka Valkyrie, and now it's walling Celesting even more because Celesting does not have good setup and it's not that strong. So running Stratosaur or Phasenaut is pretty good here too, because Stratosaur can take advantage of its low damage output by setting up Magnify, and it can get rid of its barbs with Gust, and Phasenaut can also do the same thing as Stratosaur by using Teardown, and it is a lot more offensively oriented, which lets you use pivots or use its pivoting moves to switch out of the battle. Offensive counters and checks for Celesting is also very simple. You just want to run stuff that can hit it super effectively and outspeed it. Halventic can be a special case because it is a bit slower, but it does have enough bulk to take a few hits. Baneki is pretty good here because it does be immune to Gamma Pulse along with Totab. Ikazune already outspeeds it base stat wise, and you're probably going to outspeed it with boots anyways, letting you hit it with a super effective Zip Zap or Thunder Strike. Zulang can hit it for Zip Zap or Thunder Strike, so it can provide more momentum. And Vesperatu can also do some slapdown shenanigans. You can of course run some other stuff, which is what I recommend, but this is what I had first in mind. And for the offensive teammates for Celesting, this is very simple because you just want to run stuff that can deal with the stuff that I speak to. Mainly dark types like Vesperatu, Eclipse, and Cephalops will be pretty good, along with Ursul with that slapdown coverage. Earth types like Gargolem Regular and Gargolem Attack will be pretty good because taking out the metal types and stuff that it typically resists is pretty good. Air types like the Gargolems and Wintrix is also pretty good because most of the stuff are fire types that would like to switch in on Celesting like Pyrolin and the Chartiki, and the earth type coverage from the Gargolems can take out the electric types, which is pretty important. And of course you can run stuff like Deladrix, who can hit most of these stuff super effectively, who doesn't necessarily have the greatest type matchups with another Celesting on the same team, but can do some amazing damage with its coverage. And finally, the defensive teammates. Celesting, Phasenaut, and Harvesect is a pretty good offensive trio for defensive cores. Phasenaut and Celesting do good with their resistances. They share a lot of that, so that's pretty good. And of course, they can pivot out with their pivoting moves. And Harvesect and Celesting is pretty good defensively because I'm pretty sure they can cover all of their weaknesses, which is really nice. And of course, you can run other stuff like Obsidian, Barblast, and Tyrex, because they can do pretty good with Celesting's resistances, being able to resist its weaknesses, which is pretty nice. And of course, you can run other defensive stuff. You don't have to be limited to these two. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the conclusion and my thoughts on Celesting. So overall, Celesting looks to be a pretty interesting Lumion. In my personal opinion, I find this pretty similar to other stuff like Luminami, Phasenaut, and Nemare in terms of pivoting potential and being fast as well as being bulky. Well, you can't really say that about Luminami, but I can see the similarities between those three Lumions, and while I personally think Celesting does a bit of a better job than Nemare, possibly I can still see Nemare doing a lot better. I don't really see Celesting to have a pretty good niche. It is basically Valkyrie but defensive, and what's even worse is that Celesting doesn't have the power, so its lack of coverage against the stuff that it's weak to is even more evident. Valkyrie could get away with it because it does have strong coverage along with not strong coverage but strong power along with great setup, but Celesting doesn't have that. And on top of that, when you compare the fact that it um, doesn't have good setup and longevity, it is forced to run a healing item so it can stay alive. Celesting looks to be a Lumion that it can be taken advantage very fast. So I don't really know how to feel about this Lumion. I'm pretty sure it's probably gonna be like B or B plus tier for me as of right now, but it does look pretty interesting so far. So, like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're into more of these kind of videos. I will be making more. And of course, remember that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.